Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. We're coming to you live from La Paz, Bolivia. My name is David Adler. I'm the General Coordinator of the Progressive International. I'm also the coordinator of our electoral observer mission here in Bolivia. It has been an incredible week, a historic week here, as we've come to observe these historic elections and the peaceful, just, and open democratic process that has ushered the movement towards socialism back into the presidency. I'm very happy to be joined today by two of our delegates who have been part and parcel of this mission. The first I'd like to introduce is Tessie, who joins me here from La Paz as well. Let's hope Tessie's internet connection can withstand the grueling stream. And second, I'll introduce one of our other delegates, who's a member of the SEM in Poland and a member of our Progressive International via his party, Razem. Maciek also joins me now from La Paz. Maciek, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Great to be here.
So, kick off this session with a couple of perspectives from our other delegates who couldn't be here on our stream. And in the spirit of internationalism, these are going to be clips that are both in Spanish and in Greek, and will kind of orient us through the international community that has gathered in this delegation. So we'll kick it off with a video from Gerardo Pizarello, a deputy in Spain, who was, again, a key factor, a key part of this coalition that has mobilized to Bolivia. Here's Gerardo.
Hace unos días llegamos a una Bolivia sombría, amordazada, con un gobierno que nos intentó intimidar del mismo modo en que intentó aplastar la voluntad de su propia gente. Y sin embargo hoy nos vamos de una Bolivia luminosa, que no se ha dejado amedrentar, que ha hablado con libertad y con dignidad. El triunfo del MAS ha sido un acto admirable de resistencia a la opresión, una exigencia de justicia social, de paz y una muestra una vez más de que solo el pueblo salva al pueblo. Hoy estamos más convencidos que nunca de que necesitamos un internacionalismo solidario a la altura del siglo XXI. Porque hoy es Bolivia, pero mañana será Chile, y luego será Ecuador, y luego serán los Estados Unidos, y luego cualquier pueblo en el que haya opresión y se intentan imponer privilegios odiosos. Y siempre diremos lo mismo: o hay democracia real, con bienes comunes para todos y libertades para todos, o es la barbarie. Y nosotros estamos aquí para defender siempre la democracia.
That was Gerardo Pizarello speaking from La Paz before he departed back for Spain about the importance of international solidarity and the defense of democratic rights in Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Latin America, and around the world. I thought we'd kick off the session by first of all, to ground us. Today's session will be split in two parts. The first part we'll be doing in English, and the second part, in about 15 minutes, we'll be doing in Spanish. Now, because I have you here, much, I thought we could kick it off by talking a bit about just the straight up logistics. What's happened? What is the story of our delegation? What have we seen since we arrived on Thursday, and how has that narrative evolved from before the elections to after the elections? So maybe we can start off, on Thursday, Friday. What was the feeling, Maciek, and what was the sense from the perspective of international observers about what this election would look and feel like?
First of all, I think we all came here because we were afraid that once again somebody would try to steal elections from Bolivian people, that once again after a year we'll have another coup. Fortunately, nothing like that happened, but when we arrived here, we just wanted to maybe make it a little bit harder and try to avoid the worst scenario. So the first days for me was just waiting for something to happen. We had all of this organization, all these official meetings, but still, we still waited for something to happen. We were afraid of something bad happening and waiting for the day of the election. So for me, first days was mostly just waiting for something to happen, and that was it. But the whole delegation, the whole mission was kind of a last-minute mission, because for me, we got the answer from Bolivian tribunal basically a few days before we departed for Bolivia. So the whole thing was kind of last minute. And after we arrived here, I personally was full of worries about what's going to happen. So that was it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these first two days were full of real fear and anxiety about what might be on the horizon, and the fears were not unfounded. As many of you would have seen, officials from the Bolivian government were actively attempting to intimidate international observers like the Progressive International, claiming that they would either put us behind bars, kick us from the country, or indeed inflict all sorts of other violence. And I think that one of the major fears we confronted was one of the armed forces.
It was another thing. Suddenly, our role as international observers became a huge thing in Bolivia. So it was as I understood it, it was a try of undermine all the observers, because as we know, last year the OAS played their bad role and really made the coup possible. So I think this time they just wanted to make the whole observers look bad, because they knew that nobody would believe the life of OAS once again. So that was the try. And yeah, it was funny to see. It was interesting to see that suddenly you come to Bolivia and you're the news on the main media. So it was a thing also. And it meant that our mission really is something that it's important.
I'll bring on Tessie, who now finally joins us here. Tessie, maybe you can say a bit about as well what it felt like to prepare for this mission. You know, in those first days, the Thursday, the Friday, up before the elections. Maciek brought up the fact that we didn't expect to be front page news, and yet we were. What do you think that meant for the election, in both in terms of observation and in terms of the prospect for democracy ahead of the election?
So I agree with Maciek that the OAS did not do a good job, and as most of us will agree, last year. And I think part of the challenge was to figure out and to train ourselves on what it would mean to do a kind of observation that would not replicate the mistakes that the OAS did. And it also meant just improvising on the ground based on the different events that were happening that we weren't expecting. And I think, so when there was intimidation against international observers. And I think part of the job of a progressive observer is to actually call the attention of that intimidation away from the Bolivian people. So maybe there's a little bit of that contention by calling the attention of the intimidation towards international observers rather than against the Bolivian people. So if there's some relief in getting that intimidation ourselves rather than the Bolivian people, then we are doing part of our job.
One of the people who was leading this campaign of intimidation was Arturo Murillo, who was also in charge of mobilizing the armed forces on the weekend of the election. This is something that gave us tremendous pause as international observers. And here I'd like to play a short clip of what happened the night before the election, when, much to our surprise, Arturo Murillo was out in the streets of central La Paz, talking about the need to keep Mas out of power and the glories of having removed a dictator from power. We'll play a short clip of what that looked like here. That's a video of the Bolivian armed forces the night before the election here in La Paz, something that gave us tremendous pause and concern as we moved into Sunday morning of election day. So let's go straight there to election day. Maybe we can help all of our viewers and supporters of the Progressive International really understand what the mission looked like hour by hour. So let's start, early morning. Tessie, what happened, in the morning when we were heading out to the polls and seeing the opening of the polls? What were we seeing? What was the feeling on the ground, especially just hours after this kind of very visible intimidation tactics in the streets of La Paz? How did it feel?
The feeling was between anxious and festive. I think people did not know how the day was going to play out. But what we started seeing were just lines of people peacefully waiting to vote. Then there's always questions of organization, there's impatience. This is also, I think, part of the complexity sometimes when you are observing is to not overdo a little bit of the chaos that is just imminent in any question of mass mobilization. So when we observe people in line for hours, people arrive, the polls open at 8, people arrive sometimes at 5 a.m. so that they can vote because they come from very far away. And the general environment was still organized. The judges were incredible. The notaries of the poll stations were really knowledgeable of what had to be done, and yeah, they were punctual. And once, maybe after 15 minutes of starting to work, things regularized, and then from then on, I think we observe almost no disruptions.
Maciek, would you like to take us a bit from the morning period, observing the opening through the rest of the late afternoon and late morning and early afternoon, in terms of the several sites we visited, both in El Alto and La Paz, and rural and indeed in urban areas?
I think the night before is crucial for how we've seen the things, because this was the last pictures we had in our mind before coming and really observing this election, was this military mobilization in the center of La Paz. So we're really worried that there's gonna a lot of bad things happen at the day. And what we've seen was just regular elections that was, for me, I was very much impressed by the real engagement of people voting, organizing, and it looked very professional. Obviously, there were some small difficulties, but still, it was very different from what I know from Poland. But I was very much impressed with the real engagement of people, delegados, but also voters, and I was. Once again, we were waiting for something bad to happen, and nothing happened. It was just the regular elections, and everything was just fine. So we've spent a day at 10 of the polling stations. We've seen opening, we've seen closing, we've seen how the votes were counted, and it was just a celebration of democracy. Basically, it was a great thing.
So to give a bit of an image of what that might look like, this celebration of democracy, we thought we'd play a short video that we recorded from the field to show a bit of what these lines look like that Tessie was referring to, and what the kind of calm and peaceful atmosphere that Maciek referred to looked like. So we'll play that video now. That video should give you a little bit of a sense of what we were seeing in the field. And we thought we'd go to another one of our delegates, the estimable Sofia Sakorafa, who comes from Greece and Meta 25, who gives us a brief report from the field right out there in Ciudad Satellite. It's in Greek, but we think it gives a nice overview of what we were seeing, and the kinds of, as Maciek was saying, the ways in which this peaceful process bucked certain expectations and fears of unrest.
Σας χαιρετώ από τη Λαπάζ, έξω από ένα εκλογικό κέντρο. Όλα πηγαίνουν κανονικά, υπάρχει πολύ μεγάλη προσέλευση κόσμου και οι κάλπες θα κλείσουν στις 5 η ώρα, οπότε θα ξέρουμε σε λίγες ώρες από τώρα ποιο ακριβώς θα είναι το αποτέλεσμα. Ελπίζω πραγματικά το αποτέλεσμα είναι τέτοιο που θα δικαιώσει το λαό της Βολιβίας για το μέλλον του και για το μέλλον των παιδιών.
Sofia Sakorafa speaking to us from Ciudad Satellite as part of the PI delegation here in Bolivia. So we've got a couple more minutes to talk about what we were seeing before we move to some of the amazing questions that are coming in from our viewers. I thought I would just pass it back to you both for some of the reflections. I think from where I'm sitting, what was really, really concerning to us as we came to the close of the day was that we'd said, okay, we saw this peaceful and orderly process, but when the polls close at 5, that's when things can get really crazy. Because just to give a bit of a background, there used to be a system in Bolivia that was eliminated literally the last minute, 12 hours before elections began, that would have given us a rapid count, right? Through images that were taken of so-called actas, of the kind of vote count, that would have given us not a full image, but a halfway image that of the final count. Now, we can get into this a bit later, why that was eliminated, because it was very, very controversial. And in fact, most people think it was the source of the criminal errors that the OAS made last year in their accusation of fraud. But what this meant for us concretely as observers was that we needed to call for patience and call for peace in the hours after the polls closed, as the vote was counted slowly, so that we could really, really prevent any kind of tampering, fraud, or violence that may have come after the peaceful process we witnessed. So Maciek, I'm curious to know, what was your experience kind of as the polls closed and we moved into night? How did that, as an observer, what were you feeling and seeing?
First, we need to say that this asking for patience was the message from the day one that we wanted to spread, because we wanted to avoid what happened a year before. So time after time, we said that we need to wait for the final results to come, and we cannot jump to conclusions before. We cannot believe in any fake news that could come before. But still, after polls closed, and there was absolutely no news about the results, there was no official, unofficial polls. There was nothing for hours and hours. It was really hard to know what's going to happen. It was very strange for me, because what I expect from Poland, from Europe, is just the polls are closing, and second after we've got exit polls. Nothing like that happened. It was really hours and hours of no results, and it was worrying for me, because I didn't know what's going on really at that time. There was nothing going on the streets. There was nothing going on TV. There was no news at all, and the results came in late at night. So it was this waiting was really something that I didn't expect. There was new for me.
Tessie, how about you? You and I have spent time also putting together this Informe, our final report, and going to turn into the TSE. Those were obviously crucial hours when we were out of the field, but where anything felt like it could happen, and the streets felt quite tense. What do you think that we can, what happened, and how was the feeling for you in those final hours?
So something that I kept thinking about was that this is not like any other election. This is an election being held during the de facto government of a government that arrived through a coup. So and this election is the consequence, the result of a pact made and accepted by the victim of a coup. So when you're in that context, and the elections went formally well. So what we saw was peaceful, festive, regular, just like everything was mostly by the book in terms of the actual election. But the context in which the election is taking place is more complicated. So part of the fear is how much of this is substantial and how much of this is just not going to stick. And the role the armed forces play in moving the ballots is very important, because it is the armed forces too that are part of the reason why we're in this context of a little bit of uncertainty. So as we were thinking of this report, we on the one hand wanted to show how incredible this whole process had been, and at the same time to not forget the context in which it took place.
I think that's a helpful bridge to some of the questions that we're getting from our audience. But before we do that, I think it's important that we round this off by saying what actually happened at the end of Sunday, which was so much to our surprise. Not just the landslide victory that the MAS secured, returning them back to the presidency after this horrendous year of repression and violence, but a real celebration of the process and the outcome, and a quite smooth transition in terms of the coup president Agnes, as well as the opposition to Carlos Mesa conceding. So we thought we'd play a quick clip of what's happened at 2 o'clock in the morning when the first second poll suggesting a landslide victory for the MAS. Here they are at MAS HQ.
El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo.
Just a short clip of what was happening around 2 o'clock in the morning, I guess on Monday morning, the night after the elections. I think that's a nice transition to a question that we're getting from Dennis Lombardi, which is what gives us confidence that there won't be a second coup? Sure, we had this landslide victory, but given what happened last year, what gives us the confidence to say that there will be this transition of power from the de facto government to the new MAS government? Maybe Maciek, you can start off and say a bit about whether you do have confidence indeed that there won't be a second coup here in Bolivia.
We cannot be sure. I have some confidence. I will say why. First, at that night there was two crucial moments. First was obviously the results, and the second one was Agnes congratulating the winners. It was first when the results came, I was very happy, but also terrified what's going to happen next. And then after Agnes congratulated the winners, I thought it might go well. For the first time, maybe I was thinking, okay, we're on the good side, maybe. So why I think that nothing but why I am quite confident that another coup won't come in the days to come. First, I think it wasn't by accident that they couldn't steal these elections. It's because of the strength, engagement of the mass movement, about really huge popular support. About they just couldn't do that. It's just it's matter of. It's not matter of accident of moment. It's just a balance of powers in Bolivia, I believe, at the moment. That it was a win that came out of true reasons on the ground. But because of huge popular support for socialist movement and because of huge engagement in that movement, it's very hard to steal this win from Bolivian people, I believe.
Tessie, turning to you now, how would you answer this question? What gives you confidence there won't be a second coup in the days to come?
So I agree with Maciek. I think the balance of power is on the side of the people who voted for MAS. Maybe not the days to come. I think it is always like a coup is always a possibility everywhere, just as a fact. But I do think that here the coup failed to a point. So the coup didn't stick. And right now, the elections were very clear about where the power lies. So for now, I think, and I also think most people, even the people who support the right, just want to go on. Like they want to go to work. They want to stop for a second, stop thinking about politics. I think that the privilege to be able to not think about politics is something that people sometimes want, to be able to rest for a second of having to worry about your well-being in order to not just be thinking about surviving, but just be able to thrive. And you cannot think about that either way, wherever you are on the political ideology scene. There's a need and there's a desire, and you see it and you hear it from people on the ground to just go on. And going on means maybe just waiting until the next election to bring to win power, and that depends on other factors. But yeah, so that's what it seems to me.
Oh, audience because they're having keeping it good. Okay, I hope we're back now. I think that all of us are struggling a bit with this problem of connection. So we're very tuning in and bearing with us. Let's move now to the second question, which comes from Gabriel in Spain. Did the OAS really do a bad job, or did it do a good job for the interests it was serving? I think this is also related to another question we have from Kushik from India. What can we expect next from the imperialist forces? If I can take a first bite out of this, I think it's really important to situate what happened last year and what happened this year as heavily contingent events. Right? There was nothing predetermined about the fact that there was this peaceful election, the fact that Áñez and Mesa conceded to the MAS. Just as this last year, I don't think that there was anything predetermined about the OAS making this horrendous accusation of fraud that then fueled the coup. As Maciek was saying, all of these things depend on careful balance of forces, the ways in which domestic elites align or do not align with the forces of reaction, the forces of democracy, the forces of imperialism, right? And the strength of the popular movements in confronting those forces of reaction and imperialist aggression. To the answer to these questions. Oh, I fear my is.
Maybe we could answer now. So for the first question, if OA has done good job or a bad job, why not both? Obviously, it done a good job for the forces on the side of which they are, and they will play very bad role for the Bolivian people, and that's one of the reasons for our mission that we wanted to. We want to have other kind of observers on the ground. We didn't want to have only OAS and on the ground doing the same thing once again. And it worked. It obviously worked because this whole campaign of intimidation coming from the Bolivian authorities was the only possible answer. They knew that they cannot do the same thing once again because nobody will believe those claims from OAS. So they wanted to undermine our observations. So I'm not sure it worked, but for sure our presence on the ground made some things impossible, and I'm very happy that I could help in a small way.
Yeah, so to that question too, there's, I think part of the observer job is to be, I mean, as we know, impartial. But impartiality is a really difficult thing to be or to exist. So there's whether the OAS did a bad job or a partial job is kind of out of the question because they basically got it wrong, and so part of the job of observation was to, as Maciej was saying, in terms of balancing of forces in terms of expectations and who people and what people want to see, and then with those balances of forces, there's the probability that the observation as a whole will be more productive is more likely, rather than putting all of the cards, all of the chips on one observer. You have different people, and therefore they balance each other, and there's not just one organization with clear or unclear interests, with malicious or not malicious intentions, decide and set the tone of what to expect.
Again, apologies for my connection. I think that Tessie's answer takes us really nicely to George's question coming from London. What did the Bolivians do to organize between the coup and the election, and what are the lessons? So, I think it's very, again, it's so tempting to see elections as these discrete moments where either everything's predetermined or forces coagulate, and you just kind of get an expression of what the sort of democratic landscape is on the ground. It's crucial that in the core massive organization by trade unions, by strikes, to organize roadblocks, and their right. There's nothing secure permanent about the existence of election. Agnes, the continually postpone the date of the election in order to
Okay, so I'll take it from here. Yes, I think speaking to David's point, there's always a temptation to consider democracy within a discrete period of time. So between elections and the next election. And I think part of the lesson from the Bolivian people is that democracy is not constrained within a discrete period of time. And it is also not restrained to the way in which the government works. It is like the different bases of society in Bolivia continue to engage in democratic exercise throughout the year, throughout the last years. And so when we think of democracy and when we think of what happens with democratic organizing, it is part of it is elections, but a big part of it is how people live their day by day and how people organize themselves, which then can be amassed into a big party like MAS or not. And so I think the Bolivian people just did that and continue to still believe that they could take power not only in the streets, not only in their own organizations, not only with unions, but also with the government. And so it was an additive understanding of democracy rather than kind of paused or expectational understanding of democracy.
I want to agree with Tessie over here because the most impressive thing I've seen was not the elections, but the movement. And the fact that political party is just a part of popular movement. And the elections is just a small part of democratic process that is going on, a small part of the fight that is going on between the people and the oligarchy, basically. So once again, I want to say that what we've seen here was not an accident. It's a result of years and years of struggle, years of building the movement, years and years of creating something great and beautiful and powerful. That's the most important thing. Something really powerful, and that's the main important thing and main important message from Bolivia. That if you want to win the elections, you have to have something much more than the electoral machine, and that's what's really happening over here.
I'm going to try once again to speak to you from the great beyond here. Again, I want to apologize. I see in the comments that everyone's complaining about my mala conexión. Y me perdonan, por favor, porque también estamos sufriendo aquí por la conexión. I don't even know if this message is going out, but I will continue to try. So we have really, really good questions coming in about the prospects for the MAS government now that the elections appear to have taken place in a peaceful manner, and that there might be a transition of power without violence. So this comes from Asim from India, which is, what can Luis Arce do to curb mutiny in the armed forces against the people? And I think that there's more questions coming from, for example, from Julio, who asks, is it possible for Luis Arce to hold the members of the coup accountable for what happened last year? One of the things that's coming out in a lot of our conversations with Bolivians here is that this election can't be the closing of the book on the past 12 months. It has to be the opening of a new book for justice and reconciliation for what's happened in the past year. Maybe, Tessie, you could say a bit about what we're hearing from Bolivians in terms of what this new government might be able to do and what we can do as activists and international solidarists in holding accountable those people who are responsible not only for a political coup d'etat, but for massive violence and repression on the streets of Bolivia.
Yes, so because we cannot forget that this is a government that arrives through a democratic process, but from a coup government, the question of memory is very important. And the question of accountability is very complicated because there's differences, and I think up until now, the Bolivian people have shown to be very creative in their struggle against imperialism, and that struggle against imperialism also happens by fighting its forms. So we will have to wait, we'll have to see, but there's also a desire to go back maybe to understandings of justice, of restorative justice, that do not overlap with what we're used to thinking when it comes to political justice. And I think part of our role is also to listen, to learn, and to help at this moment, and this is the most urgent thing, in case a trial goes on later on, to gather and archive as much evidence as possible for a trial to be able to go on. So there's several pieces at play, and one of those is that we have to open as many doors to as many kinds of justice as we can, because we do not know which pieces will serve us later on, and we do not want to miss the opportunity to either restore the society, because it is not only a question of the responsible ones. It is also the question of the victims and who the victims are. And the victims are the people who were massacred, but also their families, their communities, the country, and the people who are interested and their trust. So all of those connections cannot be restored or addressed in one trial. But one trial might be also very important. So there's all these pieces, and we cannot miss the train of opening those doors.
Maciek, I'm going to turn to you now. What do you see on the horizon for this Mas government and the prospects for a kind of justice and reconciliation for the events of the past 12 months?
To be frank, I just don't feel I know enough to answer this complicated question. I believe that this is a very hard one that Bolivian people has to answer. And one thing I can say, that hearing what Luis Arce says after winning the elections makes me confident that they are ready to answer in a very responsible way. But I wouldn't like to say what it's gonna be, in fact, because I just don't know enough. I don't live here. It's not a thing I could say.
Well, in turning from, I totally, I think that's a reasonable answer, not only from the perspective of an international observer, but also because one of the things that we've been encountering here on the ground is just the level of uncertainty that has suffused this election and the past week of us being here, the sense that we just really don't know necessarily what's on the horizon. But let's turn now to some things that we think we do know, the lessons that we think we can take from the PI delegation. For us as PI, this is obviously an historic moment for us to be able to mobilize and make good on our promise to not treat solidarity as a slogan, but as an opportunity for action. But more broadly, in the question of reconceptualizing solidarity and the role of international observers in contentious elections like this, Maciek, what do you think that we can learn from the role of international observers and the role that solidarity more broadly played in Mas's landslide victory on Sunday?
First, I wouldn't like to overestimate our role, but if we will see how the authorities reacted to our presence over here, you can say that it really mattered. But if it wouldn't matter, if our presence on the ground wouldn't matter, they wouldn't have to answer. So I believe that it was very important that international observers, also from Progressive International, was here. It was crucial to make things more complicated for the authorities to try to steal the elections or to try to pretend another coup. So I think it's very important that we came here, and I'm very proud that I could be here, and I'm very happy that I've witnessed what I've witnessed. But I also hope that we played a little role to help things happen like they did.
And beyond just the case of Bolivia, Tessie, I mean, in thinking about the Progressive International as an emerging force, as a new institution that's, expanding, growing, and deepening its relationships around the world, what are the kind of more generalizable lessons you feel like we can learn? We've had so many questions here in the chat, all over our social media, in my own inbox. Are we going to the United States? Are we going to observe elections in the future that will certainly be contentious and require more international scrutiny? So what do you think, building on what Maciek was saying, what are the lessons that we can learn as PI, that our viewers can learn, and that others who are keen to defend democracy around the world can learn from our experience this past week?
Something we have all learned from the power that the Bolivian people created is that organizations that work as vessels rather than as pyramids have a more powerful impact. I think the PI works more like a vessel, and it amasses and it holds different forces, which then themselves are very creative with each other. And so when we think of observations, when we think of creative forms of solidarity, also part of the creativeness of it is to always keep thinking about what works for the particular context that you're thinking about, and to think from particularities, not to think of like, oh, well, you did it here, then why don't you do it also here? It's, well, international observers in Bolivia were very important because the main aspect and the main problem in the Bolivian particular case was a case of observation. So if you understand the problem, then you can understand the way to have some I don't know, some
Impact.
yeah, impact. Thank you very much. Some impact, because if you think that the same strategy works for every case, then you are doomed to fail from the start. Therefore, these conversations, the constant flow of information, the contestation of our own ideas and our own ways of traditionally understanding how to get involved is very important. And so later on, maybe the US doesn't need more eyes. One of the things David said in an interview was that the eyes of the international community were coming to Bolivia. The eyes of the international community were not in Bolivia before. So a gaze was important. The eyes of the world are in the US. So maybe observation is not the main thing through which one can have a major impact. So you have to think in these ways, because it is not about the feeling of the solidarity or the feeling of the action. It is about the strategy, and it is about the ways in which things can connect each other. So soon we'll have the Chilean elections, the Ecuadorian elections, the Venezuelan elections. And so with each case, again, maybe we are tempted to think, well, they're all Latin American countries, therefore maybe it's the same action that we need to be thinking about. But maybe that's a mistake. And so that's part of, I think, what the Progressive International does really well, thinking about the particularities of each case with through the connections with everyone else.
Thank you, Tessie. I think this is a good opportunity. God, I hope my video stays. I think this is a good opportunity for us to transition out of English into Spanish, to do a short segment here in Spanish. Maciek, I know that this is sort of disenfranchising you, but I want to thank you for making time this morning, and maybe give you the last word for our English segment here. Anything that you want to add to what Tessie said about what the PI and others can learn as we move into the future?
I would say that elections are much more than just elections, and what you need to have a real stable democracy is much more than just elections. You need popular engagement and the movement, and that's the main lesson I learned in Bolivia. So that's something I would like to end with.
Thank you so much, Maciek. I hope you have an excellent morning, and of course, I'll see you around. Ahora vamos a hablar un poco en español para poner en la mesa nuestras reflexiones, conclusiones y las implicaciones de nuestra misión para la observación electoral. I want to thank everyone who was watching in English and encourage all those who are watching English to continue submitting their questions, which we will now take in Spanish. Me parece una oportunidad en esta parte de la sesión también otra vez escuchar a nuestro compañero, otro delegado, Gerardo Pizarello, que también estaba aquí con nosotros, que tiene un mensaje fundamental, muy importante. Ahora escuchamos.
Hace unos días llegamos a una Bolivia sombría, amordazada, con un gobierno que nos intentó intimidar del mismo modo en que intentó aplastar la voluntad de su propia gente. Y sin embargo hoy nos vamos de una Bolivia luminosa, que no se ha dejado amedrentar, que ha hablado con libertad y con dignidad. El triunfo del MAS ha sido un acto admirable de resistencia a la opresión, una exigencia de justicia social, de paz y una muestra una vez más de que solo el pueblo salva al pueblo. Hoy estamos más convencidos que nunca de que necesitamos un internacionalismo solidario a la altura del siglo XXI. Porque hoy es Bolivia, pero mañana será Chile, y luego será Ecuador, y luego serán los Estados Unidos, y luego cualquier pueblo en el que haya opresión y se intentan imponer privilegios odiosos. Y siempre diremos lo mismo: o hay democracia real, con bienes comunes para todos y libertades para todos, o es la barbarie. Y nosotros estamos aquí para defender siempre la democracia.
Qué increíble este mensaje por parte de Gerardo. Me emociona muchísimo y tengo como goosebumps aquí escuchando esto. Entonces, hemos pasado estos 45 minutos hablando en inglés sobre lo que pasó, lo que hemos visto, cuáles son nuestros hallazgos. En breve, Tessie, ¿nos puedes, puedes darnos una imagen o una narrativa ¿qué hemos visto? ¿Cuál fue, cómo era el entorno el jueves, viernes, sábado, antes de las elecciones? ¿Cómo ha cambiado este espíritu entre sábado y domingo?
Creo que del jueves al lunes hemos pasado de miedo a tranquilidad, pasando por festejo, que es una ola muy bella y también muy complicada, porque el jueves y el viernes tácticas de intimidación por parte de oficiales del gobierno estaban simplemente llevándose a cabo, estaban ocurriendo. No todos los oficiales de gobierno, claramente, pero gente importante con voz. Siempre es muy difícil, la gente violenta es muy ruidosa. Y ese ruido había, creo que, se había apropiado de casi todo el espacio público. Y la gente tenía mucho miedo, los observadores tenían miedo, pero aún así, pues las cosas siguieron. Creo que parte del ambiente también es entender que pues estábamos en un contexto de elecciones, también en un contexto de un gobierno de facto después de un golpe de Estado, y que ambas estaban conviviendo y no podíamos dejar que nuestra perspectiva de una se sobrepusiera sobre la otra, porque lo importante era esa convivencia. Entonces, cuando estábamos en las elecciones, vimos personas formadas por horas, con mucha esperanza, pacíficamente, ordenadamente. También estamos en un momento de pandemia, la gente saliendo, no solamente con la amenaza de las Fuerzas Armadas, también con el miedo de infección, con un sistema de salud precario, con muchas personas tratando de decidir el futuro de su país. Y entonces del jueves, de un sentimiento de miedo, un viernes, el domingo, la gente salió sin saber qué esperar, la gente no sabía si las Fuerzas Armadas iban a estar tranquilas o no, pero de todas formas, muchísima gente salió a las calles. 85% de la población del padrón electoral votó, lo cual es un padrón, o sea, es muy, muy alto. Y en un contexto de intimidación, en un contexto de pandemia, en un contexto de cualquier elección. Y el domingo vimos elecciones, vimos gente muy emocionada, con muchas ganas de votar. Y el domingo en la tarde no sabíamos qué iba a pasar, no sabíamos cuál era el margen de victoria, no sabíamos quién había pasado, se eliminaron los conteos rápidos, entonces no sabíamos cómo tener una idea de lo que estaba sucediendo, y creo que en ese momento, pues sí, pasó hasta esto.
Sí, lo importante para mí es que sería muy fácil ver los resultados y asumir o decir que, bueno, eso tuvo que pasar así, que obviamente no fue un golpe de Estado, mira, han tenido elecciones pacíficas, justas, libres, exactamente lo que esperábamos. Pero, como has dicho, Tessie, es muy importante que enfocamos en la gran determinación del pueblo boliviano. 85% de la población ahí expresando su derecho constitucional a votar en el contexto de intimidación y violencia, represión en las calles, en las carreteras del país. Eso es fenomenal. Y también de la organización. Una otra cosa que también la comunidad internacional se olvide es que no fue determinado que íbamos a tener, la gente de Bolivia iba a tener esas elecciones 18 de octubre. Nos acordamos de que Áñez, la presidenta de facto de Bolivia, después del golpe de Estado, estaba, ¿cuál es la palabra? Posponiendo esas elecciones meses y meses. Y solo fue por las huelgas y las manifestaciones en todo el país que la gente de Bolivia lograron en obtener esta oportunidad para expresar la soberanía popular. Entonces tenemos que verlo en esos pasos. Paso 1, la organización, que fue maravillosa, de un movimiento popular. Paso 2, la movilización, que también de nuestra parte como observadores internacionales hemos visto un proceso magnífico en muchas partes del Alto, de La Paz. Y la parte 3, que es muy relevante para nosotros aquí en la Internacional Progresista, fue la solidaridad de la comunidad internacional. Tessie, hemos hablado de eso en inglés, pero me parece muy importante comunicarlo otra vez en español. ¿Por qué fue tan importante que los ojos del mundo estaban puestos aquí en Bolivia?
Sí, creo que hay diferentes formas de ejercer, de ofrecer solidaridad. Y en el caso de Bolivia, con el golpe de Estado, muchas veces cuando existen momentos de violencia, sobre todo violencia que se justifica como una forma razonable para llevar una democracia liberal, por ejemplo, es que hay muchas cosas que pasan atrás de bambalinas y hay muchas cosas que la gente no ve y hay muchas cosas que dices, bueno, el resultado es bueno, según esto, parece que hay un gobierno, parece no sé qué, y al mismo tiempo, en ese momento, la gente tiene miedo. La gente tiene miedo de salir, la gente tiene miedo de hacer cosas, la gente tiene miedo de hablar. Los medios de comunicación al final tienen conexiones tienen vínculos fuertes con fuentes oficiales. Y entonces, en esos momentos, tener los ojos de la comunidad internacional en Bolivia, simplemente lo que hace, y a veces la transparencia puede tener muchos problemas, pero uno de los beneficios de la transparencia es que permite que las personas se alivien un poco su miedo, se sientan acompañadas, y al sentirse acompañadas, la valentía inherente que tienen las personas consigo mismas y en la organización con otras, como se da el permiso de abrir esas organizaciones, porque te sientes que cualquier cosa que pase, hay alguien que te va a cachar. Hay alguien que va a decir algo. Y creo que muchas veces subestimamos el poder que tiene sentir que a alguien le importa lo que está sucediendo contigo, con tu vida y con el destino de tu país.
Bueno, tenemos varias preguntas de personas que están mirando esta transmisión. Esa viene de Susana Cortés, que es una pregunta muy relevante. Ella pregunta, ¿qué responsabilidad tuvo la OEA en este golpe de Estado y los medios de comunicación internacionales? Y también te pongo en la mesa la pregunta, ¿qué podemos aprender? No solo del episodio con la OEA en el año pasado, sino como en una imagen un poco más completa de lo que pasó en el año pasado y también estas elecciones de la fin de semana pasada. Es importante que comuniquemos la gran importancia de lo que está pasando aquí en Bolivia. No solo como una fuente de esperanza, que es, obviamente, pero como un caso histórico de la transición pacífica, esperamos, después de un golpe de Estado de la derecha, ultraderecha, a un gobierno de la izquierda que ofrece una visión de un socialismo popular. Entonces, Tessie, ya sé que es una pregunta un poco caliente, pero ¿qué piensas de la responsabilidad de la OEA que tiene y qué implica para nosotros, más bien, qué implica para nosotros como la internacional progresista que tiene la ambición de poner más equilibrio entre las fuerzas de esas instituciones de imparcialidad, observación y nosotros?
Creo que a veces, y esto, lo que dices bueno, estoy completamente de acuerdo en términos de los equilibrios, o por lo menos de los encuentros o de tener más de una fuerza en movimiento, porque la OEA no sabemos, uno no puede saber si tuvieron malas intenciones, si tuvieron buenas intenciones, si fue un error metodológico, si fue todas las organizaciones tenemos intereses, todas las organizaciones tenemos expectativas, y eso forma parte de cómo entrenamos, cómo observamos, cómo reportamos. Entonces, el tema de la imparcialidad debe de recaer no en una organización con su propia visión del mundo, con sus propios métodos, sino abrirse quizá a una pluralidad de visiones que pueden entre sí crear algún tipo de contrapeso sin depender en la imparcialidad impuesta, supuesta de un órgano. Entonces, sí, entonces, y creo que eso es muy importante también cuando uno piensa en responsabilidad y en acciones, que pues no se trata de enjuiciar a la OEA. El caso, bueno, en este momento de lo que yo estoy hablando, quién sabe cómo pasen las cosas después, pero en este momento no se trata de adjudicar culpas para saber quién estuvo mal y entonces ya lavarnos las manos. Es, bueno, ¿cuáles son los factores que juegan un papel importante para entonces poder pensar, bueno, quizás no podemos saber, no sé si queremos saber si había una intención maliciosa detrás de la observación, pero uno no sabe y entonces lo que uno sabe es lo que uno puede hacer, lo que ve y los resultados fueron muy malos. Entonces, desde la Progresista Internacional, en el caso particular de Bolivia, la decisión de intervenir como observadores, cuando el problema principal dentro del conflicto que llevó bueno, donde estuvo el golpe de Estado, fue un tema de observación, entonces es, bueno, si el problema está en la observación, entonces activamos desde la observación.
Sí, bueno, seguimos, gracias Tessie. Seguimos con una pregunta porque ya no tenemos mucho más tiempo, pero seguimos, tenemos como dos más temas que debemos tocar. La primera es sobre la justicia y reconciliación aquí en Bolivia, porque va a ser muy fácil y muchísimas personas alrededor del mundo van a querer olvidarse de lo que pasó en el año pasado. Y después de las elecciones y nuestro rol que hemos desempeñado como observadores internacionales va a ser trabajar y apoyar a la gente de Bolivia que han sufrido un año horrible para llegar a justicia. Entonces tenemos aquí una pregunta por Cristina que pregunta: ¿qué pasará con los responsables de tantas muertes inocentes, el tremendo daño impuesto en tan solo un año? Tessie, hemos estado hablando con muchísima gente aquí en Bolivia. ¿Qué quieren ellos y qué sabemos del proceso actual y qué debemos hacer con nosotros como en el nivel internacional?
El tema de transición, de justicia transicional siempre es muy complicado porque, por un lado, se tiene a gente responsable por masacres, por violencia política y claramente parte del impulso del de la necesidad emocional y colectiva es, bueno, estas personas tienen que ser responsables, se le tienen que hacer responsables. También, mucho de lo que hemos estado escuchando y lo que hemos hablado es la necesidad de la memoria, pero también la posibilidad de ser creativos en términos de justicia. Bolivia ha estado a la vanguardia en términos de resistencias al imperio, de resistencias a las formas de pensar, de resistencias a las formas de organizar, de resistencias a las formas en las que el poder se manifiesta. ¿Por qué sería diferente en términos de justicia? En términos de justicia, no sabemos exactamente cómo van a ser las cosas, no es en este momento nuestra responsabilidad, pero por lo tanto, y esto lo decía antes en inglés, hay que abrir la mayor cantidad de puertas posibles para que la mayor cantidad de concepciones de justicia sean posibles una vez que los eventos se desarrollen. Y esto puede ser justicia restaurativa en términos de las comunidades, porque no solamente se trata de hablar con los responsables, se trata de pensar en las víctimas. ¿Y quiénes son las víctimas? Las víctimas son definitivamente las personas masacradas, las personas que han muerto, también son sus familias, también son sus comunidades, también es el país. Y entonces, cuando pensamos desde esa perspectiva, nos llevamos la tarea de pensar un poco más allá de quizás la necesidad de una responsabilidad, por ejemplo, de castigo. Y es, bueno, no existen otras formas en las que quizás si lo que nos llevó a donde estamos es el caso de un Estado militar con violencia, con golpe, con asesinatos, ¿desde qué otras perspectivas se puede seguir adelante? Y sobre todo porque en este momento, y la razón por la que se movilizó el pueblo boliviano fue para dejar de tratar de sobrevivir y para poder vivir bien. Y un vivir bien implica pensar en justicias sustantivas. Y creo que ese es el reto, y el reto de una justicia sustantiva no es olvidar, es transformar la memoria de formas que ayuden a restaurar las comunidades.
Sí, gracias, Tessy, por esas palabras muy poderosas. Yo pienso que para concluir esta sesión, porque ya estamos llegando a la hora, a mí me parece muy importante que comuniquemos como la Internacional Progresista, que sí fue muy importante que estábamos aquí como una observación internacional, para hacer observación internacional. Y lo que nos han dicho muchas personas aquí, compañeros, compañeras bolivianos, bolivianas, es que sí, fue muy importante porque como ofrecer ese tipo de apoyo y poner los ojos del mundo aquí en Bolivia ha enviado un mensaje a las fuerzas del golpe de Estado y de la ultraderecha y sus amigos imperialistas que no íbamos a aceptar otro golpe contra la democracia boliviana. Pero lo más importante para mí es que no lo vemos como solo elecciones, ¿no? Que no vamos como atrapados en esta concepción de la política electoral. Lo que hemos visto, sí, hemos llegado aquí solo una semana, ¿no? Para apoyar ese proceso muy definitivo de las elecciones aquí en Bolivia. Pero la narrativa es mucho más amplia. Y el rol que podemos desempeñar como la Internacional Progresista no solo pertenece a las elecciones. Y el tema aún el tema de las elecciones libres y justas no solo pertenece a esa ventanita de 7 días antes y después de unas elecciones, ¿no? Para tener elecciones libres, justas, para tener una democracia real, como ha dicho Gerardo, necesitamos desarrollar instituciones de poder popular y mantener un espacio de una sociedad civil donde la gente sí pueda hablar francamente, organizarse sin la amenaza de violencia. Es decir, que estamos muy orgullosos y felices y contentos de lo que hemos visto y el rol pequeño que pudimos jugar aquí en Bolivia. Pero eso es como el trabajo empieza aquí, empieza ahora. El trabajo de trabajar con todos los bolivianos, incluso a Luis Arce en la presidencia, para seguir desarrollando esta visión de socialismo popular y ganando contra las fuerzas de imperialismo y las fuerzas autoritarianas. Mi español está muy fragmentada, ¿verdad? Entonces te paso la palabra última, Tessie. Si quieres como dejarnos con un mensaje de, bueno, sí, en el momento que estamos preparándonos para salir de Bolivia, ¿en qué debemos pensar ahora y cuáles son los próximos pasos para nosotros como la Internacional Progresista?
Creo que en ese momento y a veces es difícil pensar en la escucha como acción, pero de la misma forma que primero llegamos a traer nuestros ojos y los ojos del mundo, ese tipo de ojos, los ojos que trajimos, no son ojos que se van con nosotros en el avión, son ojos que se quedan. Y creo que con los ojos que se quedan, quizás también sería momento de traer oídos y empezar a escuchar cuáles son las cosas que van pasando, cómo se van desarrollando, y que las lecciones que aprendamos sean a partir de una experiencia de, como decía David, de entender lo pequeño que es nuestro rol, pero lo crucial que puede ser, y por lo tanto desde esa humildad y ese valor de continuar trabajando sabiendo que igual el impacto es pequeño. Entonces creo que eso para mí sería una lección importante.
Pues muchísimas gracias a ti, Tessie, a todos los delegados internacionales que han venido aquí con el nombre de la Internacional Progresista. Ha sido una experiencia increíble venir aquí con el apoyo financiero, también con el apoyo político de tantas personas alrededor del mundo. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí esta mañana con nosotros. Y estamos muy curiosos qué están pensando ustedes, qué debemos aprender nosotros de esa experiencia, dónde debemos ir y cómo. Y como comunidad internacional progresista, seguimos en esta lucha y cerramos aquí. Muchísimas gracias a todos.